All right, everybody, it's 6 o'clock, so I'm going to get started here. This is the Financial Forecasting Committee, and we're meeting for our first meeting tonight. So welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone that's here. Welcome to this year. For the first time, we're having BevCam join us. So thanks to BevCam, Kim in the BevCam booth for bringing this live to you at home. If you're watching, following along at home. This is a process that we do every year. We have 3 to 4 meetings in the fall, and with the objective of filing a report with the state per the city charter and ordinances that we file a financial forecast by December 31st of the calendar year. So we will have 3 meetings. They will all start at 6 p.m. and my goal is always to keep it to 2 hours or less. I'm gonna go over the agenda that we're gonna have tonight, just so people have an understanding of the flow of the meeting. I have some opening comments, and then we're going to approve the minutes from our last meeting last year. And then we will have some opening remarks from Brian Ailes in our finance department for the city. And then we will have some more opening remarks from Jerry Perry, who is the council's budget analyst. And then I'm going to open it up to the committee members who are up here, and for any opening remarks they would like to have and share. And then we will have a presentation by Mr. Ailes on the proposed municipal revenues. And then we will wrap it up with some closing remarks, and we will adjourn from there. So I have been the chair of the Financial Forecasting Committee for the past 3 years, so I'm familiar with the prior year's reports, and I believe this year we will prepare a similar report for fiscal year 2026. And like I said, per the city's ordinances, we are to file this report by December 31st with the Mass Department of Revenue. And I'm intending to continue that timely streak that we have in filing on time. So the role of this committee is to make recommendations to the administration and council. This body that is up here, this committee, has no authority to make policy. However, it plays a critical role in iceberg spotting, so to speak, indicating to the administration which direction we would like the budget to go in the coming months for FY 2027. The fact is there is a forecasted deficit of over $3 million this year, and continuing compounding on in the coming years. And we are going to have a more difficult task this year as a committee to actually choose the path that we want to take, and to, at the end of this process, to vote on if we want to choose the path of recommending reductions in services or an increase in revenues to maintain level services. And hearing the facts presented by both Mr. Ailes and Mr. Perry, we can hear what the specifics of those 2 options would look like in terms of actuals and cuts and ideas for revenue. I'm grateful that everyone up here tonight has many years of experience with this committee and its work in previous years for this discussion, because this will not be an easy year or discussion. And I'm hoping that we can keep some of our questions to really focusing on the matter at hand, which is making some of these challenging choices this year. And to that end too, I do value the public's input in this process. However, this is not a public hearing, so this will primarily be meetings presenting data and then hearing the discussion of the committee of what direction we have decided to go in making this report. That being said, any questions you do have or comments you do have, I would welcome you to email them to me at kfeldman@beverlyma.gov. And I also am hoping to be able over the course of the 3 meetings to be able to share some of those questions. If people have pointed questions on the process or specifics of these meetings, if you're following along, I'd encourage you to share them with me so I can possibly read them at one of the meetings and have those questions answered. Consistent with prior years, any committee members who wish to submit any language for the final report needs to get the proposed language to Mr. Perry by Thursday, December 4th to be included in the draft. We will review that draft at the December 9th meeting, and then the final report will be voted upon at that meeting as well. I think, also I'd like to say that we do have one of the committee members, Lorinda Visnick, on the phone, on speakerphone. So she is on speakerphone, and she is, when she would like to speak, she will be able to chime in when I will take her, she will speak into the microphone up here. So she is present as well. So with that, if we just want to go around real quick, if people could just, on the committee, could introduce themselves very briefly, just name and your appointment while you're on the committee, that would be really helpful. And then after that, we'll take a quick approval of the minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Jerry Perry. I'm the budget analyst for the Beverly City Council. I am technically not a member of this committee. I am considered an ex officio member of the committee. However, my role on this is to work with the chair and work with the finance director to kind of coordinate the paperwork and write the report and move that along. So that's my role with the committee. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Karen Fogarty. I am the City Council's appointee to this committee. I've served here for cumulatively over 10 years. Part of that service was when I was Ward 4 School Committee representative.
Hello, my name is Jeff Silva. I am the school committee representative from Ward 4.
I'm Brian Ailes. I'm the finance director for the city.
There we go. Took a little while. My name is Dominic Copeland. I am a community representative, typically on the finance and facility community, and was asked to be on this committee as well as a community member.
My name's Paul Manzo, 89 Lovett Street. I am appointed to this group by the mayor. And like Karen, I've been sitting in these seats for a long time. I'm also currently the representative to the Essex North Shore Agricultural and Technical High School. And so I'll weigh in when we get to that part of the discussion as well. Thank you.
I'm Emma Puglisi. I'm the Director of Finance for Beverly Public Schools.
Thank you. We also have, he's not with us yet, but Scott Hausman, City Councilor for Ward 4, is on the committee as well. We hope to be seeing him tonight. And I also was asked to share that Council President Flowers could not be here tonight, but she is following along at home. So hello to you, Council President, at home. And she had a work commitment prior to this. So that is that. And then with that, everyone on the committee has received, oh, Lorinda, I'm so sorry. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks. I am Lorinda Visnick. I'm the current Ward 6 school committee member, and I've served on financial forecast for, I really have lost track of how many years.
Thank you. And I'll try not to forget about you again. My apologies, Lorinda. So with that, everyone I think should have received the prior year's final meeting minutes for review. So the first order of business is to take a vote to approve the December 4th, 2024 meeting minutes. And I will say this is going to have to be a roll call vote because we do have one member attending virtually. Yes, virtually. So do I have a motion to approve the minutes from our December 4th meeting?
Motion to approve.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second, okay. All those in favor, oh,
Madam Chair, I believe the school business manager had a slight amendment, if I'm correct.
Yes.
okay, yes, thank you.
Mostly that I was not named in the attendees, but was in fact present and am mentioned later in the minutes. So just to add that
Okay,
by
yes.
ordinance, school business official.
Okay, on that first page, okay. All right, with that amendment, with the addition of Ms. Puglisi, is that noted to add her to the minutes? Okay. With that amendment, are we ready to, are there any other amendments that anyone needs to make? Okay, so, as I am not going to try and put everyone in alphabetical order, in my head, I'm going to go down the line. Ms. Fogarty? Yes. Okay, Mr. Silva?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
Mr. Manzo?
Yes.
Ms. Puglisi?
Yes.
Ms. Visnick?
Yes.
And I am a yes as well, so that order passes. Is that 8 to 0? All right, minutes are approved. All right, with that, I am going to turn it over to Mr. Ailes for some opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in light of kind of our discussions last year and what we're looking at for the coming fiscal year, I thought it would be helpful to look at some historical data to help explain some of the situations that we've navigated in the past and some of the kind of pressure points that we're seeing as we project into the future. So Mr. Perry did distribute out some draft numbers for the forecast going forward. But in addition to that, I've provided each member this evening with hard copies of this presentation that I'm just going to walk through real quick. What it is effectively some charts and some numbers that I want to just give some context to. The first one that you see here has to do with our general fund revenues. So we're talking about the general fund because that's what we're forecasting. And these are actual revenues that have been received year over year. The blue line represents the annual receipts, and you can see every year it fluctuates up and down in terms of a percentage growth when compared to the previous year. So this measures what percentage the revenues grow, or in some cases may have declined in a given year. The red dotted line shows the 3-year average, which is a more appropriate method to look at revenue trends because it kind of smooths out some of the peaks and valleys that you see, and the peaks and valleys are caused by timing of revenue receipts or lags in certain things. But the red line, which represents the 3-year rolling average, and the purple line, which represents a 5-year rolling average, are really what I tend to look at when I look at this. And you can see all of the fiscal years in terms of the averages leading up to FY 2022 tend to be in the 3.5% to 4% range in terms of annual revenue growth. Now, keep in mind, this is actual revenue that we bring in, so it has no bearing on where the monies actually get spent. It's what comes in the door. So it's a pretty hard number. And from FY 2022 on, you can see that it begins, the averages as well as the annual amounts begin to tick up. And what I do want to point out for those years is that we know definitively that those are caused by a couple very specific occurrences. For the first one is in FY =23, we had a significant increase in the Chapter 70 number in the city. And so that caused the ability to grow revenues at a much higher rate than we had seen in previous years. In addition to that, over the last couple years, we've seen an increase in particularly investment income, which is the money we hold as a city in various investment vehicles are yielding a higher rate than we've historically received in the city. It's prior to 2022, we would receive under $100,000 a year in interest income for all of our holdings. The last 2 years, it's been up over $1 million. This last year, it was $1.6 million. So that is a major cause for why you're seeing the revenue tick up, especially in the averages, up over 4% and more towards the 4.5%. Now, it's important to note that those are the driving factors that are pushing this revenue up, because particularly with investment income, there will be a time where the interest rates, and they're already beginning to kind of precipitate down, but we're meeting with our banks regularly. We're yielding now about 1% less in return than we did last year at this time. And depending upon how the Fed reacts over the next few meetings, we don't know how that's going to affect our revenues in that particular area. So I want to, hold on, bear with me a sec here. So as we look to our spending, in FY25, this is actual money spent. So not budgeted, this is actual money out the door. And I wanted to highlight the three largest areas of employee compensation, that's both the city and the school's employees, also healthcare premiums, and pension obligation. Those are the three big white percentage numbers that you see, because collectively, they comprise 71.6% of all of our spending in the city. Okay? And this is relevant because as those spending categories fluctuate, there is less of the budget to manage that fluctuation. Meaning if these categories spend at a rate higher than the revenue growth is, then the remaining 30% of the budget needs to absorb that in order to balance a budget. And so that can create some complexity, particularly when we look at these three spending levels. So I'm going to show you now kind of how these three spending levels have historically tracked. So this is employee compensation, similar chart to the revenue chart. You can see up until FY 2022, the average growth for employee compensation was around 4 to 4.5%, right in line with where our revenues were growing year over year. As of FY 2022, you can see that begins to tick up. And we all know that there have been a couple different factors that factored into this. There were collective bargaining agreements that played a major role in this. And also there was some shifting of FTEs when ESSER was sunsetting. Some of those positions, I believe, were shifted onto the city side, creating an increase in cost related to employees. I don't put a lot of stock in the annual, the blue line here, because what happens with our employee spending is it's kind of cyclical. Sometimes you can be out of contract and then there's retro payments that go in a given year. So you can see it kind of peaks and valleys for that type of spending. So I look much closer at the averages for this. The next one, which is a major cost driver, is our healthcare premium costs. This has fluctuated significantly over the years. And what we're seeing as of late is that the premium costs and the cost of healthcare in general are increasing at significant rates. This past year, I believe it was a 10% premium increase that we implemented, and I'm looking to Emma because I know she's in tune with these numbers as well. And that's not too dissimilar from the previous fiscal year. One thing we were able to do to try to kind of mute the increase in spending or costs in this area is we restructured our prescription drug program for retirees, and that created some spending relief in FY24. But even with that spending relief, you can see that it still went up 10%. So these costs are kind of out of our control for the most part, but it's relevant because it makes up so much of our budget. And the last piece is the pension obligation costs. And you can see if you look at the averages here that it hovers right around the 4.5% mark, which we would expect because that's the amortization schedule that the city has committed to in terms of repaying the city's long-term pension obligation and pension liability. So we would expect that line to remain at roughly the 4.5% level going forward. And so I wanted to combine all of those spending categories, all 70% of the budget, to show you, comparative to the revenues, how those spending categories are faring in a 3-year comparison and a 5-year comparison. So you can see in both cases that up through FY 2022, they've been fairly consistent. There's been overages and underages of the spending compared to the revenue growth. But then from FY 2022 forward, you can see that the gaps are starting to widen in terms of the growth in terms of spending in these categories compared to the growth in our revenue streams. So, with that said, I did want to just make sure I touched on a couple things. How we've handled this over the past few years, because we're seeing this kind of divergence, is that like I said, we restructured our retiree prescription drug plan to provide spending relief. We built up and utilized some excess levy capacity, which allowed for an increase on the revenue side of things. We shifted the road and sidewalk budget allocation out of the annual operating budget, and we'll be looking to free cash moving forward. So that provided spending relief or budgetary relief. And we're relying more heavily on other non-tax related revenue. And that's relevant because a lot of those non-tax related revenue categories that we're going to talk about are economically tied. They're motor vehicle excise when people buy new cars. They're meals and room tax when people are going out to eat and have discretionary spending at their disposal. They're permitting fees when the economy's good and people are developing or putting additions on their homes. That's all captured. We're relying more increasingly on those to try to meet our budget needs. That ultimately leads to less available free cash because excess revenues beyond what we budget goes to free cash, and that's effectively how we fund a lot of our capital needs throughout the city. And more recently, by shifting the road and sidewalk to a free cash draw, we'll expect to look to free cash to fund roads and sidewalk funding going forward. The other thing we did is we've level funded in cash, effectively, the debt burden in the city, and this is also where the city maintains its infrastructure and invests in its buildings and in its various infrastructure that it needs to maintain. Back in FY16, debt service comprised 6.9% of the budget. Today, because we've level funded it in dollar, FY27, we expect that it'll be 5.1% of the budget. So you can see that that's beginning to precipitate down in terms of a percentage of the budget. That's important and something I think we all need to be mindful of, because if you have less capacity to put money into infrastructure, it begins to erode kind of the fabric of the community, buildings, schools, roofs, equipment, all those types of things that we rely on, but we don't think much about day to day. So because we've done all those things over the past few years to continue to support the budget, this year is going to be particularly difficult because those options aren't available to us anymore, right? So as we look forward, the decisions now we have to make in order to make the budget balance are more difficult to make. They're not as easy as this. So last year, when we had this process, we were looking at a very similar number in terms of a deficit for the coming fiscal year. It was over $3 million. It is in this case too. But last year, we had some of these levers we could lean on to try to balance it, and we did. It wasn't easy. There was a lot of hard work and discussion went into it, but we arrived at a balanced budget. This year, again, those levers don't exist. So the discussions need to focus more on, when you look at that divergence, are we going to make decisions as policymakers? Well, I say we, but the policymakers, are they going to make decisions on the expenditure side to try to bring that better in line with the revenues, or are they going to make decisions on the revenue side to try to bring that further in line with the spending trends?
Mr. Ailes, can I just ask you, since we have a broader audience than just the members of the committee, to explain briefly what free cash means so that the people attending our meeting or the people watching at home can understand what that term means?
Yeah, so as an organization, we can't spend in the negative. So every given year, we either have savings because we underspend a budget, or we've estimated that we'll bring in X dollars in revenue, and we brought in X dollars plus Y. And the Y then falls to free cash, which is a pool of money that's available for future appropriation, for whatever the mayor and the council deems appropriate. Historically, we've used those funds for fields, for capital projects, for one-time uses that are in line with our financial policies that we've adopted as a city.
Thank you.
Is that helpful? It's like a savings account, I guess you could
I
say.
think there's just a lot of misunderstanding with the term if people aren't familiar with it, so I appreciate the clarification.
Also, I have another question coming from Lorinda, or from Ms. Visnick. Can you please explain that free cash is not extra every year, but rather
Right.
a rolling amount?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Visnick, that's a good point. So when free cash gets certified in typically this time every year, the Department of Revenue basically goes through all our books and says, here's what you've got left over, and it's available for appropriation. And let's call it $10 million, that's roughly what it is this year. So that $10 million gets certified, but then you go through a full fiscal year and you're bringing in money and you're spending money. And the council may choose to appropriate from that free cash and bring the balance of free cash down. And it's not till the end of the year, when all the dust settles on the spending and the revenue, that you're able to replenish that back to a balance. And so what we do strategically is we release that free cash when we understand where the variances are in the budget, so that we're able to replenish to a level that remains fairly consistent year over year. Because when the bond rating agencies look at us, they look to our fiscal health. And if there's wild fluctuations in free cash, particularly if it's going down, that signals to the bond agencies that we're spending more than we're bringing in a given year. Bluntly, that's what it means. And that can have implications on our bond rating. Our bond rating is relevant because when I talked about the debt service level before, we issue debt and it gets traded through the SEC on the market, and we affix an interest rate to that based on our credit worthiness. So if we get good bond ratings, we get a better interest rate, and we're borrowing tens of millions of dollars at a time. So the interest can be significant if that interest rate fluctuates as a result of our bond rating either degrading or improving. And in our case, we've been fortunate because it's improved twice in Mayor Cahill's tenure, because we've been conscious of these balances and maintaining that. And that has saved the taxpayer millions and millions of dollars in interest over the years because we've been able to enjoy a better interest rate, similar to like a mortgage on a house.
Thank you for that. And what rating do we have currently?
We are a AA+, which is the one from the top. Next step would be a AAA, and that's the highest.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the other elected officials we have in the room. I thank you for being here. We have Councilors St. Hilaire, Councilor Crowley, Councilor Spang, Councilor Sweeney. We have school committee members-elect Ms. Ducharme and Mr. Taylor, and we have our school superintendent, Dr. Cushing, with us, and we also have Mayor Cahill with us. And with that, I know that you would like to share some remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to flesh out a couple of things that Mr. Ailes said, especially with the conversation about free cash. It's one of the most unfortunate terms in government. It's a definition the state uses. Free cash, the word free is kind of absurd, but it is the cash reserves that remain in our accounts at the end of the fiscal year, right? And that's where, and then from the end of the fiscal year until the state certifies a number, we can't use it, right? And when it is certified, which is generally around about this time of year, towards the end of the calendar year, beginning of the calendar year, then it's available for use as needed. when, I'm going to go back to the two recessions in the first decade of this century, the city had no free cash. The city had no stabilization fund, right? So the city had no reserves, and it was really difficult during those years. You've heard me say that we closed a middle school during the first recession, we closed an elementary school during the second. That is, the city had to. The city had to zero out local operating budget money for roads and sidewalks for 10 straight years. The city had to zero out a line that we try to have in the Department of Public Services budget for equipment and vehicles for 10 years. So those are the kind of things that happened during those recessions. And what we've been able to do collectively is build reserves, and the best practices that we look to, that DOR and other financial institutions point to, are to suggest that your cash reserves, free cash, but let's call it cash reserves, are supposed to be between 3% and 8% of your operating budget. That's kind of a window of best practice. And we've codified that in our financial practices, right? Financial policies. And then stabilization, the goal is to be between 10 to 15% of your operating budget. Right, so that suggests you should be between 13 to 23 of your operating budget in reserves. We are currently 19?
Yeah.
18, 19, somewhere in that window. So we're in a good place. And then the challenge is to be really thoughtful and careful about that money. As Mr. Ailes said, we've been able to use it for the kind of needs that are too big to be able to do in an operating budget and too small to want to bond for over multiple years. We bought our ladder fire truck with cash reserves, right? We fixed the floor of the North Beverly Fire Station because it couldn't support a truck anymore with cash reserves. We had, when the high school was rebuilt, the electrical switches never worked. We bought all new electrical switches for the campus with cash reserves. A couple of times we've gone there for roads and sidewalks. We've used that money to buy the computer-aided dispatch equipment for the 911 dispatch center. We've used that source to build 2 softball fields and a new track and a new turf field and lights and stands at the high school. So those are the types of things that cash reserves have been used for during the time that we've been doing this together. And we've been able to kind of tap them without depleting and actually growing them, which I think was, as you pointed out, Mr. Ailes, is going to be very much harder to do, because what we've done over the last 2 budget years is we've pulled those levers, as you say, right? We had together built a $2.7 million line item for roads and sidewalks. We had built a $180,000 line in the police budget for 3 police cars every year. We had built up to, I think it was $500,000 in DPS for equipment and vehicles. The first 2 of those lines are now 0. The DPS line is $150,000, where it had been $500,000. Mr. Ailes mentioned that we together didn't go quite to the levy limit 2 years in a row, 3 years ago and 2 years ago. And that was very specifically because of what had happened with commercial property tax rates really flatlining and residential going through into orbit. And we had a lot of concern about the ability of people to pay those tax increases. We've since tapped, that was about $1.4 million collectively over a couple of years. We since collectively have tapped that, i.e. gone back to the levy limit over the last 2 years, last year and the year we just entered, as we eliminated the road and sidewalk from 2.7 down to 1.2 and then down to 0. And that was specifically to fund all of our contracts, all of our city and school side contracts in the first 2 years of this 3-year cycle. So, you know, those are some of the things that have landed us where we are now. Is that, I hope it's helpful, and I'll stop there.
Thank you. That's,
Yeah, thanks.
so with that, I am going to open it up to Mr. Perry for some of his opening remarks and analysis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. As I introduced myself earlier, I am the budget analyst for the City Council. This position was established about 25, 30 years ago via charter and city ordinance. For those veterans who were around back at the time, the city got about $8 million problem back at that time. And the role that I play working for the City Council is to be independent, to say some things that aren't always popular, but to try to protect the fiduciary position of the city of Beverly by getting up and making recommendations that aren't always, as I said, popular. I see some of my council friends here, there are times I've said things they don't like either, but that's okay. Having said that, I have really, along with Mr. Ailes, we spent an inordinate amount of time. As I think anyone knows, I've been talking, if the last 2 fiscal years at the public hearings, this is the year we're going to have a challenge. And I agree with everything that Mr. Ailes said. I agree with everything the mayor just said. And that this is going to be a tough year, and some very, very difficult decisions are going to have to be made, whether we reduce services or we raise revenue to offset that. And the chair mentioned that quickly. I'm not going to repeat what has already been said, but a couple of things I will add. Just to help some of you folks up there, the mayor is correct. We just certified our free cash with the Department of Revenue in my old office, and I'll give you that number just so, complete transparency. The amount of certified free cash was $496,162. That's what was certified, pretty consistent with what we've seen in prior years, which is, I think, a testament to the good work that the finance director does and the forecasting we do. It's really important. There seems to be a lot of conversation, but I'll go down this path quickly. Free cash and the stabilization are considered reserves in this business. And it is prudent financial practice not to use reserves for operating costs. That's what gets you into trouble. And though I never had seen the records of 25 to 30 years ago, but my instincts tell me when this city got into trouble back then, they probably were tapping reserves to the point there was no more reserves. As the budget analyst for the city council, and consistent with our financial policies, I will not be able to recommend the utilization of free cash for operational costs in FY27. It's a bad idea. The city council can legally do it. I will share that. The mayor could propose it, but I will not be recommending it because it's a bad idea for a couple of reasons. One, it's poor financial practices. 2, it causes structural deficits. 3, you shrink your reserves or you're causing that structural deficit to go on. And this is really important. In order to protect the financial position of the community, we need reoccurring revenues to match reoccurring expenditures. Free cash is not a reoccurring revenue. Thus, you don't want to do it. That's why the mayor articulated a whole bunch of things that we've used over the last things. Mayor, I'll remind you, we also used $3 million of that to do a security system years ago in the public school system, as I recall. But I just bring that up as well. So it was good stuff. The concept of using free cash should be capital projects. It should not be for salaries or health insurance benefits or things of that nature. It really should be used for reoccurring expenditures, and I think it's important for the public to understand that. I wanted to articulate that because it seems obvious that seems to be an issue out there. Now, that said, and again, I don't want to repeat, this is the beginning of the budget process. This has taken on a little bit more significance given the challenges we're going to see for next year when we do the budget in June. But I do applaud the chair's conversation that she'd like to have a conversation, I believe, at the December 2nd meeting, where this committee should be advising the mayor, the city council, and the school committee on various components, whether we should raise revenues or whether we should reduce services, given the structure of what we're looking at revenues, and we'll be talking quite a bit about that tonight. So I applaud that. But I want to put some context into some of the challenges, at least as I see it, and looking forward with some of the concerns I have. If this committee decides that they want to do the best they can to maintain level services, and I highly doubt from my observations of really looking at this stuff, I don't see us enhancing or adding more services. That's going to be almost impossible in my view, based on what I'm seeing today. But if we're going to try to maintain level services, then we have to raise new revenue that we haven't raised before. And I'll come back to that in a minute. If we decide not to raise new revenue and reduce services because we have to balance the budget by law, the mayor and the city council have absolutely no choice. They have to do that. That would require reduction of services. Now, going back to the revenue side, I've really researched that, though I heard a new one today. I'll be fascinated to hear it. But from my observations and my research for the last several, and I've been with the city over 9 years now, But in my opinion, the two major areas of revenue that we should be exploring or considering are, one, school committee fees and the revolving fund, things like the preschool program, the afternoon kindergarten program, athletics, transportation, there's a bunch other that Emma will, I'm sure, educate us on December 2nd on. In my analysis, there's upwards of in the vicinity of $2 million that could be raised there if the school committee so desires to do so. That's a policy decision for them. But that is one area that the city could explore if that's something we want to do. The other area, and this is not going to be well received, that's why I prefaced who I am and what I do, is the trash fee. We are raising approximately $1.2 million in trash collection, trash fees. I think each household pays, I think it's $100 per household, if I'm correct. That fee has been flat since I've been here. I've been here this is my 10th budget now. That's never been raised. It cost approximately $3.8 to $3.9 million to pay for the trash services we received, and we all experienced what happened when the strike went on and the challenges that went with that. But the trash fee collection that we raises about $1.2 million to offset the cost, and the general fund is raising about $2.5 million. So if we, and again, these are policy decisions for the mayor and the council to make, but if you wanted to raise the trash fee, there's an opportunity to raise $2.5 million. Our draft deficit comes in at $3.6 million and change right now. So we have to either find money for $3.6 million or cut services. So on the service side, and I've done a lot of work, and Mr. Ailes and I have discussed this at great length, if we are looking at $3.6 million, and the committee may amend that to some degree, that's fine. What would we do with that? Now, Mr. Ailes just articulated, which I completely agree with. He had 76 point something other percentages labor costs that he put up on the thing, which I was going to say 75, but he had a better accurate number there. Really, if we're going to reduce the budget by $3.6 million, we don't have a lot of options. And in fairness, it's not just Beverly. All the cities and towns in the Commonwealth are facing this. It's not unique to here. And I've had the opportunity in my professional career to work with almost every community in the Commonwealth. This is one of the better run communities in terms of the finances. It really is. And we've been able to put off some of these challenges because of the way we do handle our finances over the last 7, 8, 9 years here. But that said, if we have to reduce $3.6 million in budget cuts for FY27, I will extrapolate this to FTE counts, or full-time employee counts. Each employee is approximately $100,000 when you look at salary and benefits and things of that nature. So that would equate to 36 employees having to be eliminated if we just did strictly that. There are other options, whether we buy a police car or a dump truck or things of that nature, but if it was strictly labor, which you saw the 76% data, it would mean a reduction of 36 employees. And what a lot of people don't know is that we are not in the private sector unemployment pool. So if we have to lay people off, that means we have to pay for the unemployment on top of it. The rule of thumb is 3 to 1. If for every 3 employees you lay off, you got to lay off a 4th one to pay for the unemployment. So that ratchets up to 45 employees. Again, this is a worst case scenario, and I don't want to spook anybody with laying off 45 people, but if we did strictly that and didn't raise revenues, it could be as worse as that. And to extrapolate that even further, and if I'm wrong in this, as I understand it, we have approximately a little over 900 employees at the Beverly Public School System, and we have approximately over 300 on the municipal side, police, fire, public works, city hall, things of that nature. So it's a 3 to 1 ratio. If we were to do layoffs proportionally, across the board, that would mean like 35, 36 staff at the school system. It's not necessarily all teachers, but staff, and about 9 or 10 on the municipal side. And that would be really difficult. So I appreciate the fact that the chair has articulated that this committee, I believe, should make a recommendation to the mayor and the council whether we should raise revenues to maintain services, if that's what they want to do, or should we live within the laws of Proposition 2.5 and reduce services. Part of the city ordinance charges states that the Financial Forecast Committee shall explore ways to acquire revenue, and I hope we'll have a more robust conversation with regard to that. That said, Madam Chair, I could talk for 2 hours on this stuff, but I'm going to stop right there. I wanted to put some context into this, and I'm more than happy to work with the committee as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. I appreciate that. And I think if anyone has heard me speak before at either the council meetings on the budget or here in financial forecasting, I have lots of thoughts and ideas regarding the direction the city should take. However, I am going to keep the discussion with committee members we don't hear from quite as often as me, at least for now, because I think everyone here knows that I have no problem making my thoughts known when they need to be, so that time will come, I promise you. So, with that being said, I am going to open it up to the committee members if they have any clarifying questions or opening remarks they would like to share, or ask Mr. Perry or yes, Ms. Perry.
I had a question for you, Mr. Perry, about the trash fee proposal. So what was the number that you thought that we could raise if we increased the trash fee by, was it $100 per house?
As I understand it, and Mr. Ailes knows this better than I, but as I understand it, currently, and for at least a decade, if not longer, we have been charging households $100 annually. I believe they pay $25 a quarter for that fee. That generates approximately $1.2 million. The general fund, in other words, the general fund, which is the tax levy, the laws of Prop 2.5, augments the expenditures of that about $2.5, $2.6 million for trash expenditures. So the entire cost is just under $4 million to do that. If the city were to decide, and a lot of communities have already done this, that 100% of the trash fee, again, I'm not saying we do this, but it's something we should talk about a little bit, that would allow the city to generate $2.5 million in general fund revenue to offset the deficit before us if we were to go that way.
So, and maybe this actually doesn't matter because the potential increase is included in our forecast going forward, but we are going to be going into negotiation for a new trash contract. And I think the conventional wisdom is that that would be a considerably more expensive contract than the one that we're currently under, correct?
Yeah, we've built in, I'm not used to this, Cam, with microphone business. So we've built in some relatively modest increases in there. We'll go through that when we hit on the expenditures, but
I guess I was wondering if the revenue increased would be wiped out by the increase in the contract.
so what we expect with increases to both the incineration fee as well as the collection fee is that at a minimum, the general fund would be covering roughly 2.7 million in FY '27 of the overall operating costs. Mr. Perry mentioned 1.27, so $1,270,000 a year comes in from a $100 trash fee. In order to completely eliminate that 2.7 million, you'd have to triple the rate.
Okay.
And you'd still be off just a little bit.
Okay. Thank you.
Great question, by the way.
We have Mr. Silva.
So one of the things that I hope we can accomplish in this is considering, rather than an either or, either raise revenue or reduce services, that we actually think of an and. I don't think it's an either or situation. I think we can benefit quite a bit if we actually think about doing both and looking for opportunities, putting on the table many different opportunities that we can think of to raise revenue, as well as opportunities where reducing services. And one of the things that a question I have is, in terms of the obligation for paying off the pension obligation. Can you speak to how aggressive we are moving to pay that, and whether we can change the strategy to maybe back off on, if we're doing it aggressively, to perhaps back off on that, and how much that would generate in terms of additional resources?
That's a good question, and I think Mr. Ailes more than me, but one quick comment. It's not either or, you're absolutely correct, Jeff. It's a combination of that too, or new ideas, that's why we're having this dialogue. I don't want to take, Mr. Ailes knows this far better than I, but I believe we're going to be paying off the pension obligation 2033, we could go to 2040. We talked about this the other day, it's a couple $100,000, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Ailes, he knows it way better than I do.
Yeah, so it's not a simple answer, because there's a number of factors that go into it, but the commitment of the amortization schedule is done by the retirement board, so it's not a policy decision that the council or the mayor can make. It's the retirement board that commits to that. The rate at which that body is committing to pay the long-term liability, as Mr. Perry mentioned, would go through 2033. The law requires us to do it by 2040. The complicating factor is that if you look at our bond rating reports, there's a number of categories that get reviewed, and many of them are touted as being very well, in a good position. The long-term liability is one where we get in trouble. We get dinged, basically, in the report. And so when Standard & Poor's looks at it, for us to make a commitment to back off of that acknowledgement could have a negative impact on how they view the city's creditworthiness. I'm not saying it would, for sure, but it's certainly a factor that they look at. So I would encourage you to look at our rating report. I believe it's on our website. If not, I'll make sure it's up there for people to look at. But because there's a lot of interesting pieces in there that a lot of times you don't think about, that we try to keep in balance so that we remain in good standing, because ultimately if that, like I said before, if that begins dipping, you end up paying what you're saving in added interest rates later on down the road.
And Brian, if I'm not mistaken, even if we were to do it, and I agree, everything he said is factually accurate, but it wasn't a significant amount. Wasn't it only a couple $100,000 I thought we talked about, if we were even to do that? It wasn't a lot of money, as I recall.
So the
On an annualized
4.5%
basis.
increase that is forecasted into the amortization schedule is about $500,000 a year in increased cost.
But the savings would be, I think, if you would have gone to 2040.
You might come off of that 100,000.
Yeah, that's my point. It wasn't,
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to materiality. We're looking at 3.6 million.
Right.
$100,000 is not a material dollar amount to jeopardize bond ratings, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Mr. Manzo?
There we go. Thank you. So just to follow up on that, we probably will find ourselves sort of caught in this discussion where you need to find $3.5 million, and do we start looking at things that are costing the city $100,000 here and $100,000 there? Or do we go right at the big nut, which is salaries and wages and people? And I think we should all think about that. For my money, I think literally, we can't just focus in on the big number, because that's going to hurt a lot more than some of the other things that we could be talking about. But at the same time, it would probably get us at the end point a lot quicker if we, downsized by 45 people, which I don't want to see us doing. And so I think we probably will have to take the time in the next week or so to talk about littler things like, fire trucks and pension plans and all that sort of stuff, so that we can, when we get to the hard stuff, it's not as hard as it could be.
Thank you. Ms. Puglisi?
So good at it, turned it on and off. I was just curious if anybody was familiar with the last time the PEC gathered and looked at the healthcare premium splits absorbed by the city. We are very lucky, especially if you look at neighboring communities, the portion paid by the city is substantial at 80%. That is not a benefit guaranteed to all, and I am very appreciative of that benefit as somebody on the health insurance plan, but as we talk about these rising costs and when we talk about the trade-off of, possible other things, I'm curious if that is one of the pieces where we've started to look under the hood.
Yeah, I mean, that's a process that's regulated by law, so we need to convene groups, certainly the collective bargaining groups. It's a long process as well, so there's value in having the discussion for sure. And I think the more we talk about this stuff openly, the more people understand kind of the trade-offs and how we kind of navigate through this together. It's not something that is gonna solve the FY27 problem, but I think if we take the approach of a strictly, just for argument's sake, a strictly revenue solution to this issue, we're gonna need to look at some spending issues as well, because when you reference those charts I showed earlier, even if you propped up the revenue to a certain level with additional fees or something, it's still only gonna grow at that 4% rate. And if spending continues to grow at a 5% rate, you're just gonna find yourself back in this situation in 5 or 6 years. So it needs to involve some of those.
Right, and absolutely acknowledging that is not an easy conversation to have, and there are so many people at the table. But again, where we're looking at, as part of this process, really the 5-year outlook, we are looking most intimately at the 1-year outlook, but considering that we are looking at a 5-year outlook, just thoughts about, what that could look like, and just if that has been started to be explored.
We do have some preliminary estimates and numbers that we employ a consultant who is constantly looking at all the other plans across the Commonwealth and what's changing in the industry and what we could possibly employ here in Beverly. So I can ask if she can provide us some info on that.
I think that would be great. And again, kudos to the team, and being, self-insured, we were, as substantial as our health insurance increases have been, again, well below what neighboring communities have seen, right? This past year, 10%, neighboring communities were seeing 20% or more. So we are lucky and beneficial in that, but also in where it costs us roughly $25,000 per employee on a family plan at that 80%, it is certainly substantial.
Thank you.
I had one other question. Mr. Ailes, can you looking at the area of the budget where we do have some flexibility, so not salaries, not pension obligations, not the healthcare premiums, the rest of the budget, such as it is. I do recall in the past, there were times when the mayor and the council needed to instruct the department heads to trim certain percentage from the budgets that they submitted. Just given your intimate knowledge of the budget, what kind of a cut would the departments, like if they did a 1% cut in all departments, could you make this shortfall up with that? Or are we talking something bigger? And then I also understand that potentially has an impact on the what ends up showing up in free cash too at the end of the fiscal year.
So, Mayor Cahill and I worked a lot, and the department heads, frankly, last budget season to get that budget balanced. And like Mayor Cahill mentioned, we zeroed out some areas that we would typically fund, like, dump trucks and police cars, and we'll look to free cash for that. But aside from the 70% of the budget that exists, there's really not a lot more rocks to turn over that we haven't already turned over. Sure, we could close, just knowing how, the budget process works, we can close a gap of a couple $100,000, maybe by doing something like that on the city side. I don't want to speak on behalf of the school's budget. I know Emma can do that, but you're not gonna realize the types of savings that we would need if we were looking strictly to cost reductions to close that gap. You're not gonna find it.
I think that's important for people to understand, because I do think the conventional wisdom is look at all the, it's $165 million, there's got to be places to cut, but we've really done all of that, or most of that work already,
Yeah.
meaning the city.
If I could weigh in, help you with some more numbers to correlate to what Mr. Ailes just said. I have all the stuff here that I gave to the city council. Last year, on the municipal side, we reduced expenditures by $1,425,395 to the dollar. As Mr. Ailes said, they really squeezed a whole bunch of stuff out of it. Ironically, Councilor Houseman's with us. He had some conversations. They saw how they zeroed out fencing for cemeteries as an example of $5,000. There's a whole bunch of that stuff that they did on the municipal side. Where the challenge was with the contract with the schools and everything, we increased the school budget last year by $7,105,550, or a 9.1% increase. And we also had the vocational education increase go up by 10.8%, or $385,779. So in terms of, I completely concur with Mr. Ailes on that. There's not a lot left on the municipal side, and I'm sure Emma will talk about the school side next December 2nd. I have not knowledge on that, but I think it's important for the community to know that they really did a lot on the municipal side to cut things, and I think you're getting closer to staff reductions if that's what it's going to be. So I just thought I'd share those numbers.
Do you have any other questions? I'd just also like to take a moment that I have, in the past, from my position on council, advocated for exploring an override. That is not a secret. And I just, in terms of timing, for people's understanding of the budget process and timing and what this committee does, the earliest anybody could look at that would be well into FY 2027, which is the budget we need to be putting together and voting on in the spring. So any of those options or things that we want to explore in that regard is going to be further down the line than what we have as a task at hand before June of 2026. So I just wanted to acknowledge that fact and the timing of things so people can better understand why that isn't exactly a full part of the discussion here at hand because of the timing and the necessity for filing this by the 31st and then having a budget for FY 27 before June 30th. So, Mayor Gale?
If I could, again, for context, because we talk this way all the time, and we're familiar with the language, and maybe some people watching at home aren't. Nobody has said anything yet about spending less money next year than this year. We're all talking about a budget where we will be spending more dollars than this year's budget, right? It's that the costs go up, and can we deliver the same level of services or not with the amount of additional funding that'll be available? So that's really what the conversation is right now. And it was, Mr. Ailes pointed out earlier that roughly 70% of the budget is taken up with the salaries, the health care, and the pension costs for all of our employees. And you've heard me say this many times. What local governments do largely is deliver services and take care of infrastructure and fix things. And the people who do that are the people who work for the schools, the people who work for the city, right? So it's right that those are the greatest costs. And so, just point out, that's what we're all grappling with, is that reality of the ability to continue to deliver high-quality services as the ability to grow the budget is tightening, right?
Thank you
Thanks.
for that. And to add on to that as well, and to what Mr. Manzo had said too, I appreciate, and Mr. Silva on the both and kind of approach to things, because I don't want this discussion to be reductive to just bots doing jobs. That's not, our city is our people, and, our budget and our budgeting is our values. And so I don't want to lose sight of that, even though we do have a hard numbers discussion in front of us. This is about, at the heart of it, the people that we both care for and that do the work in our city. So I don't want to lose, even if I have sounding like I was kind of going down that road, I'm trying not to lose sight of that myself, because those people are valuable, and that's what we care about, and we all care. Everyone in this room cares, and that's why we're having this discussion. So I appreciate everyone's viewpoint and keeping that at the front of mind when we have this discussion. So, yes, Mr. Silva.
Just one more comment I'd like to make. With the back-to-back increases with health insurance costs at double, high 9-10% increases in industry, it is common for companies to restructure how insurance is provided as a cost savings option. I think it's important to not put that aside because of how much more difficult it is in the city and school environment. It's not the same as industry, but it is something that is common to be able to deal with the finances and deal with the increasing costs. So I just think that is something that should be considered as a long-term solution to be able to control those costs.
Right, Mr. Hausman.
I don't have a lot to add to what has already been said, because I think everyone's fairly on the same page. The question is, where's the pain going to be felt, right? Because no matter what we do, there's going to be pain. One of the things that we've heard broadly nationally recently, but also a lot locally, is affordability. And, one of the things that we've heard a lot specifically as a city council and wrestled with is the affordability of housing. So anytime that we try to address the problem at hand that we have by raising costs, it's going to have a direct impact on the affordability of housing, which is a separate problem, but just as real problem as what we have. Just to help me sort of understand the math of this a little bit, I have a sort of one sort of discrete question. If we assume that the trash fee, the contract that we are going to have for the new trash fee, we know it's going to be higher. But if we establish a hypothetical number based upon what other communities have been paying more recently, I know, Mr. Ailes, you've been tracking that, Mr. Perry probably has as well. If we were to pick a number that is a likely number that we would end up having to pay, if we were to cover that cost 100% by charging the real cost of that, what would that number be? What would that look like? And what would we be left still as a gap in the budget deficit that we have now? Because I don't think that would probably cover all of it. But how close just that one discrete item would get us?
So I'm going to use very round numbers, but we've done preliminary estimates, we got to do some more work before we review the expenditure side of the equation in this committee, but Right now, we've got a plug number of $2.7 million coming from the general fund to cover trash.
As
in
we
addition to the
today.
fee. So if you covered the cost of the trash and recycling program in the city through other means other than the general fund, i.e. a fee,
Yeah.
you would reduce the potential deficit by $2.7 million. So you'd be left with roughly $1 million. I think
Yeah,
it's a, is it a million?
it's a million,
Yeah.
because it's
So you'd
three-
be
three
left
six.
with roughly $1 million deficit to cover through other means, either cost or revenue.
So when we think about either ors, and, you know, raising revenues, cutting services, that's just sort of a bookmark number to think about as we try to figure out how to divvy up the pain, if you will. Here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Is that it from the committee? Okay. So on that note, if we could move on to, Brian, would you share with us the proposed municipal revenues?
Sure. So these aren't necessarily proposals in a budget sense. They are forecasts. So this is not the mayor's numbers. This is not what necessarily is going to be presented in budget documents. What we're trying to do here is look at historical data and try to figure out what are reasonable assumptions for revenue going forward. Because what this whole exercise is trying to do is to trying to make sure that the city stays on the guardrails and doesn't go off the highway. And so we make estimates on all of these revenue streams to try to see what is going to come in the form of resources going forward. So I'll run through these broad categories as I normally do every year. I know we're on BevCam, so I might take a little bit of extra time and explain some of it, but if I fail to do so, please, you all chime in. You all probably know these streams as well as I do at this point. So starting up at the top, you see A, B, C, D, E, and F represent the tax levy. The tax levy is property taxes and personal property taxes. And that is what we bring in for FY '26. That is what we certified with DOR for our net levy. I say net because there's an overlay component to it, but we rely on $134.9 million in tax revenue, property tax revenues. The assumption going forward is that the levy is increased by the legally authorized limit of 2.5% every year. And in addition to that, we are factoring in new growth, which I'll get to an explanation of that in a second. New growth of $1.25 million for FY '27, and then down to $1.2 million for '28, '29, and '30. What new growth represents is when there is any type of property rehabilitation or additional development within the city, we're able to capture that new value over and above the previous year's levy because it's new. And so DOR allows us to certify a certain value of that. And historically, more recently, it's been up over the 1.3 plus level. It's been up to 1.5 million in a given year. If you go back probably more like 10 years, you would see numbers below $1 million in terms of an annual new growth figure. What we want to be mindful of here is we don't want to be so aggressive in a projection that we end up falling short, because we're making decisions now that are that's gonna affect what happens in FY '28, '29, and '30. So we want to be guarded against any potential shortfalls in some of these revenues. So that's a pretty reasonable estimate. It's consistent with what we've estimated in previous years. And so you can see the tax revenue net of overlay, which is line F, is what we're anticipating for tax revenue for the out years. Moving down to state aid, and I know Mr. Perry wants to speak to this, but what we have here in
May
FY,
I?
you want to?
Before you get to state aid?
Okay, sure.
I didn't know if there was questions on the levy. The levy is pretty self-explanatory for those seeing it, and I agree with everything. I just wanted to bring the attention of the overlay for a few minutes, or a minute at least. The overlay is something that's used, it's an account that Mr. Ailes monitors and regulated by the Department of Revenue, that basically is tax abatements for residents and citizens of the community who are eligible. And in the past year, I think it's important to note, because I know Councilor Houseman commented about the difficulties of housing and costs and everything else. He's correct. One of the things that both the mayor and the city council did within the past 12 months, is kind of spearheaded somewhat by Councilor Sweeney, who's with us tonight, was given additional tax relief to veterans and other things that the legislatures has recently allowed cities and towns to do. So one of the reasons you're seeing a higher cost, among other factors too, it's not the only factor, but it's important that for the residents who may be out there, the policymakers tried to understand the difficulties that are out there for a certain segment of the community, but simultaneously, it still costs the taxpayers money, and that's why you're seeing a bump up in the overlay, among other things. I just wanted to make sure people were aware of that. Thank you.
State aid, this is everything from Chapter 70 to, we call it UGA, but it's unrestricted general government aid that we get from the state, as well as some other reimbursements that we receive for, that relate to the schools around tuitioning in students, and there's about a dozen different categories that comprise these figures. Anyway, I've provided the committee with historical data on this. I believe, Mr. Perry, do you recall what, you and I had a robust discussion about this?
Yes, I'm prepared to discuss when the chair allows me.
Why don't,
You are welcome
why don't you
to.
let, yeah.
You want me to weigh in? Okay. So how Mr. Ailes, and it's really, he does a great job in my view. He puts this together, then I go in his office and I kind of beat him up a little bit. So we go over, we really discuss pretty heavily a lot of these numbers, and we try to come to consensus. And almost every year we've come to a consensus. This is one year I'm not on the same page as Mr. Ailes. I'm a tad more conservative than he is, and I want to be crystal clear. He very well may be right. I could be wrong. I don't know, but we're doing nothing more than crystal balling tonight. And I'm really concerned about the state aid. Now last year, we were fortunate. One of the reasons we closed a similar budget gap last year, one of several factors, was we received $650,000 more in state aid than we had originally forecasted a year ago this time. That's one of the reasons we were able to close the gap. This year, I'm really concerned about state aid, and I want to share this publicly. I think it's important. Some people read the papers. Mr. Ailes is going up, I believe it's 1%. It's about 200 and some odd 40.
It's 1.3% is what's carried
1.3%.
in the numbers here.
I've argued with Mr. Ailes, and I'm going to suggest the committee consider this when they take their vote on December 2nd. I would suggest we level fund state aid. That's my view, and I'll tell you the reasons why. Having been at the table up in Beacon Hill on this back in my career here, there are some concerns and some storm clouds on the horizon. I don't know if we're going to get hit with it or not, but it's important that I think everybody aware of it. First and foremost, last June, Governor Healy froze hiring. They're not hiring state employees with the exception of some public safety and a few public health-related matters, but they stopped hiring at the state level because they can see things that we don't have the luxury of seeing at our level, at the local level, up there. That really grabbed my attention quite a bit when I saw them freezing hiring. We're not doing that here in the city here, but they did that at the state level. So you should be aware of it. I just read within the last couple of weeks, the governor is negotiating with the unions at the state level. He's trying to do buyouts for state employees to reduce the FTE count, because obviously she's concerned about what's coming at the state level. And as I read, they're trying to offer tentatively $10,000 to existing state employees if they are willing to leave the employment of the state, and they're offering as much as $20,000 for people if they would retire from service of the Commonwealth. So she is trying to shrink the budget up there, and that has really grabbed my attention. I would also share with you that, and I know Emma's going to talk a little bit about this, and I put her on the spot here. We've had some discussions. I'm really worried about the federal awards we're receiving out of Washington, D.C. We receive $2.5 to $3 million, if not more, in that. Most of it goes to the schools. And I think, I'm hoping that Emma's going to explain to us on December 2nd some of the risk factors that I know we've talked about, and I'm going to leave that to her. But what's happening, and it's not a secret, I mean, the government was shut down for the last month and a half or whatever it was. Money is dried up. We have an administration that's looking to shrink government. And I'm not here to get into a political dialogue with anybody. This is about public administration. And if we lose federal funding awards, the state will lose literally several $1 billion of money, and that trickles down to us at the local level, and we get our own on top of it. So I think because of some of these factors, you can see the state freezing employments and trying to do buyouts and things of that nature, which leads me to my concern about state aid. I don't know, we got more than we anticipated last year. That could happen this year. Nobody really knows what's going to occur. But I don't believe, just based on everything I've read, and I spent a lot of time analyzing this stuff, I'm not comfortable that state aid is going to be a solution to our problems for FY '27, and so much so that I thought we should level fund it. So I just wanted to bring that to the attention of the community and the folks who are here with us tonight, that state aid, in my view, could be problematic for FY '27, given those various factors I discussed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Can I just, I'm going to just interject and summarize for those following along at home. Line G here, you are saying is an increase 1.3% year over year for the forecast, right? You are estimating that?
Yes, what I did was I estimated a 1.5% increase every year for Chapter 70 and a 1% for unrestricted government aid, everything else level funded.
Okay, and what has historically been the increase?
So for committee members that have the packet with them, it's the next page after the revenues. It's listed as state aid, and it's got historical data there. I included a 5-year rolling average of the annual increase. For chapter, well, over the 5 years past, the average has been 7.23%.
So 1.3 is pretty conservative.
It is.
And, but however, the counterpoint that you are saying is that you think it would be even more conservative than a 6% reduction in
Yes.
state aid. You think it should be level funded.
That's my crystal ball opinion, doesn't mean I'm right.
I'm just summarizing.
Yeah, no, that's
for
right,
those
you
at
got it
home,
right,
just
yes.
trying to get the
I
numbers.
do want to provide some context, though, because that average is skewed heavily by the increase in Chapter 70 that occurred in FY '23. It's
Okay.
almost the lion's share of
Right,
that.
I will, and we will,
Okay.
we will come back to that. Did you?
Yep, I just wanted to contribute to the perspective of level funding state aid relative to Chapter 70, right? There is a minimum in the SOA. That means that it cannot increase less than $30 per pupil. So there have been years where we have seen substantially more on the per pupil, but we could safely assume at minimum $30 per pupil, which is about $130,000 as opposed in next year as opposed to the 230. So a small swing. Right now, the 1.5% works out to about $50 per pupil, which is definitely on the more conservative side relative to where we have seen increases. Again, similarly aware, and we had a very robust discussion at our last FNF meeting relative to all the ways that federal money shows up and the $650 million that the governor and her team are projecting will not be coming in as a result of tax consequences from the colloquially named One Big Beautiful Bill. So robustly aware, but also feel confident that we could at least assume some growth relative to Chapter 70 under the SOA.
And if I may, Madam Chair, yeah, and I'm aware of that. However, I'm curious if you could address the population of the pupils, because we've been seeing it flat, it's dipped a little bit, it's come, the formula does require multiplied by the number of students we have. Be curious what that, I'm not aware of that.
Yes, so we have not fully certified, but we'll be fully certified by the end of the week. And so our October 1 number is about 4,600 kids, which maybe it's a little bit more than that. It might be 4,633, because we're up about 133 students since October 1 last year. So we are seeing growth, again, right, relative to our total population, it's not, but that, again, that additional 133 kids at the growth, plus also then the foundation level too, because it is a growth, and it is, right, there have been years where we've been nearly flat over flat, 45, 45, 45, 45. This is growth. So we would see increase in foundation as well as that.
Thank you, that's good, that's helpful to be aware of that. And I can't, as I indicated when I introduced myself, I'm the guy who's always pushing back hard to everybody, so I'm a conservative guy, but no one's wrong in this conversation.
We appreciate that. Okay, you would like to give more context, and I would appreciate it.
Oh, no, I did.
you
Just
did,
about the
okay.
chapter 70 being the lion's share of that
Okay.
average increase. So it's not really as conservative as you'd
Yeah.
think comparing those two numbers.
I'm comfortable with one. Off the back and top of my head, I'm comfortable with that. Okay.
Would you like me to
Yes.
move on beyond state aid?
Yes.
So next is category H, which is pilots, payments in lieu of taxes. And we derive that revenue from two areas. One is there are a number of tax exempt organizations throughout the city. Some of them contribute monetarily annually in commitments. We receive those from a number of institutions. And then in addition to that, we have pilot agreements with our solar developers in a couple instances. And so as you see this number climb on the out years, it's due to escalation in those pilot agreements with the solar developers. So this is projecting a flat line on the institution payments. Any questions on pilots? I know we always kind of talk a little bit about this, but that's certainly an area I think tends to come up when we talk about revenue and potential increase of revenues. But moving on to Medicaid, this tends to come in at roughly the same amount every year, so we're just level funding it in our estimates. What's that? Yeah.
I just want to share some context for folks who might not fully understand how this line shows up, and then also share a little bit of concern that I shared at our last FNF meeting. So our Medicaid reimbursement is a reimbursement in schools. It's federal dollars, which is important, right? Where we talk about all the federal money that comes into our schools. These are federal dollars from medically necessary health services provided to eligible students, often those on IEPs, individualized education plans. And so we can receive reimbursement for direct services through Medicaid, for Medicaid eligible services. And the reason that I emphasize Medicaid eligible, as the federal government changes what those eligibility criteria mean, there is the potential that we will see, not because we're offering less services, but because less students will be eligible. And so that could have an impact to the way that these dollars show up for our community. Again, that's not necessarily because we have less students who require these services, or that they have any sort of change in their need, but rather because at the federal level, their eligibility is no longer recognized.
Thank you.
The next category, category J, motor vehicle and boat excise. You can see it's one of the largest revenue streams outside of the tax levy and state aid that we bring in from the city. It's been steadily climbing over the past few years, but this projection, or I shouldn't call it a projection, this estimate assumes,
3%? It looks like a 3%.
does it look, yeah, that sounds about right. So a 3% annual growth in that line item.
Are the receipts so far consistent with that projection?
Yes, it does fluctuate a little every year. And so the last 2 years, we've seen a pretty healthy number come in above what our budgeted and assumed numbers were. So there's room there. Partly, there's a couple reasons why we do it that way. One is that's a major contributor to the replenishment of free cash in a good year, right? In a bad year, you come in at budget and you're able to meet your expenses. However, you don't know if you're coming in on budget until late in the fiscal year, and you've already spent all the money, right? Because think about when you get your excise bill, it's the springtime. So we've already gone through 3/4 of the fiscal year before we even know whether we're gonna be taking in what we're estimating for our third largest revenue stream in the city, right? So we intentionally leave a little guard there on this particular revenue
I
stream.
always ask about that one because the previous budget analyst always pointed to that as a canary in the coal mine.
Yeah.
That particular line item was forward-looking to the overall health of the community, the economic health of the community.
Yeah, I mean, it's driven primarily by new cars,
Right.
really, right? So there's that, there's building, well, we're gonna get into a
Yeah,
couple of these other ones,
okay.
but there's a few canaries floating around,
Got it. Flying.
flying, floating. So moving on to the next level, local receipts, that, I'm gonna come back to that, I always do, because that's kind of a catch-all for everything we don't already have highlighted here as an individual category. The meals and room tax, it's pretty straightforward. That's the added tax when you go out to dinner or you rent a hotel down by Endicott. We receive a portion of those revenues that comes through the state, and those have been pretty healthy in the past few years. And so we expect that they'll continue to grow, at least in this projection. And that projection would be in line with what historical increase has been in the more recent years. So there was the pandemic period, which you gotta kind of throw that out because people weren't traveling and revenues weren't coming in kind of how you would think they would. Sorry, I have my back to all of you for this whole thing. But this is more in line with what we would typically see in terms of a year-over-year increase for this category.
For this one, I noticed there's a big jump, though, for FY '27.
Yeah.
It's like about 12%, and then it drops down to 3% across in the coming years. So I just was wondering how those were, do we anticipate a great year next year with meals and rooms?
Yeah, well, because we've had a couple of years where this has grown greater than we've anticipated, we're able to capture a little bit more and get that up closer to what the actuals are in FY '27, and then a reasonable growth from there on out.
You've usually said that that's one of the most volatile line items. So I'm interested in sort of your shift in perspective on being able to excuse me, interested in your perspective on sort of being able to shift from saying this is particularly volatile and, sort of less reliable to saying, well, we can reasonably predict a continued increase in this.
Yeah, so volatile in a sense, I would say it's economically tied. So if there's economic pressure and people don't have discretionary spending, you'll likely see declines in this revenue area. We haven't experienced volatility other than the pandemic years. But keep in mind, this has only been in place for, 15 years or so. So we don't have data that shows how these line items reacted, meals and room tax, through a recession, because it wasn't in place during the last recession. Whereas I can easily point to, building permits and say, during the last two recessions, that revenue stream declined by 50%. Because we've got the data for it. We just don't have it here. So I think it's something we need to just continue to monitor. The benefit of this one, as opposed to the motor vehicle one, is, first off, it's less of the pool. So if it fluctuates, it's not as significant as a fluctuation. But secondly, we're seeing these numbers quarterly, whereas motor vehicles, we see it once, and it's 3/4 of the way through the year that we see it, right? So we're able to monitor it a little tighter and make adjustments if we need to. Cannabis excise. So we've got a few years of actual revenue now that we're able to reliably project out what that's going to look like going forward. So there's some modest growth built in there. Interest income. I talked a little bit about this before. This, for those that have the backup, if you look at the actual data that I provided for interest income, you can see that investment income for FY '24 was $1.4 million. In FY '25, it was $1.67 million. So your crystal ball's as good as mine. I don't know what the Fed's gonna do. I don't know how it's gonna affect these yields. I do know we were yielding 3.25 in a majority of our holdings, and now that's down to about 2.5. So that's about a third reduction in the yields right out of the gate that we can expect for next year. And so if we were at 1.6, you can right off the top chop off, a third of that, assuming there's no additional rate cuts coming. And we don't know if there will be, but if there is, I just don't want to get caught short, assuming that there's going to be $1 million coming in here. We obligate it, we spend it, and then it doesn't materialize, and we're in trouble. So this is a responsible estimate for FY '27, and then you can see as we go out in the out years through FY '28, '29, and '30, that we begin to taper that down in hopes that the economy isn't in that state of high interest rates going forward.
So I was just, if I may, we spent a lot of time, Brian and I, talking about this very issue. I mean, nobody knows, but there's a lot of conversation that the Fed may drop their rates again in December. And so we were struggling on, how to crystal ball this one here, because we've generated a fair amount of money over the years, but I think it's fair to say, in general, this is going to be less likely, less income going forward, I believe, if I had to predict, which adds to the challenge of the revenues. I just want to support what Mr. Hills is talking about. I think his estimate is accurate in my view. And I apologize for jumping in there, Emma.
No worries. I was just going to ask Mr. Ailes to share, for the benefit of our audience and the folks on BevCam, a little bit of insight into the restrictions on investments that municipalities face, rather than what opportunities might be available to someone as a individual or in a corporate environment, because that also then hinders what our investment returns can look like.
Yeah, so they need to be kept in yielding bank accounts effectively, the operational money. So they're in accounts that we also collateralize. So sometimes that equates to a lower yield because a bank needs to insure our balance, because we've got tens of millions of dollars in these institutions. And if a regional bank were to go belly up and we've got money there, we want to make sure that the money's protected. So we collateralize the larger holdings, and typically that costs us, a 0.5 point in a yield or something like that. We negotiate those on a rolling basis with the banks. I do want to provide,
I want to add to that, because that's a great question. A lot of people don't realize that. I think it's chapter 40, sections 54, 55, it's either 40 or 40 chapter, I forget which one it is now. Simply put, you got to be very conservative with your investments with the taxpayers' money. You can't go out, as an example, and invest in NVIDIA. It's just something you can't do. It's literally against the law, under state law, to do that. So as Mr. Eels indicated correctly, the yields are less. You just have to be, you could technically, the market's gone crazy, but we can't take advantage of that as taxpayers and as a community, and as such, we can't get large return on the investment. So I want to be crystal clear. It's a state law that prohibits the city from doing that. Not only Beverly, but everybody in the Commonwealth.
And just for those at home that don't have the numbers in front of them on the actuals, I mentioned that in FY '25, we brought in 1.67 million in this area. In FY '24, we brought in 1.4. FY '23, we brought in 600,000. FY '22, we brought in 40,000, 75,000, 200,000, 99,000, 50,000, 34,000. So you can see that these past 2 years or 3 years have been an anomaly. So we know that this is going to begin trending back down to normalcy eventually. The next category, land and building rental. This is, we rent out cell towers on top of our water tanks and police station and things of that nature, and we receive some revenue for that, but they're fairly fixed contracts. Occasionally they get renegotiated, but they tend to be pretty flat in terms of revenue generation for the city. We also receive some revenue for leasing of land for instance, the solar development up on the old landfill off of Brimble Ave, Otis Road. So that's in there as well. The next one, category P, is transfers from enterprise funds. That is a amount of money that we recoup back from the enterprise funds for providing central services like attorneys and accounting and executive functions and council, legislative functions. There's a mechanism by which we recoup funds from those enterprise funds, and it comes into the general fund to spend as general fund money in a budget year. So there is a very modest increase built in there. The primary chargeback has to do with benefits that are paid employees, and so it's escalated at that same rate for employee benefits. Other available funds, those are just, those vary from year to year, but we have things like the Cemetery Perpetual Care Fund, and we have the Lynch Trust Fund. For example, we have parking meter receipt funds, and these all, based on their balances, feed into the general fund to provide revenue for operations. And so that's what's contained there. The reason it goes down is because in FY '27, the proceeds from the sale of Briscoe are going away. And we have been drawing on that for a number of years. We kind of took a little bit each year for about 4 or 5 years, and that's going away. I believe there's another one that's sunsetting as well. And then the last category, R, is penalties and interest, and there's a modest increase in that. We tend to see that fairly consistently increase year over year, and so I'm just following the trend line there. Going back up to local receipts, this is everything else. And the biggest component of this is permits, particularly building permits. And so we never want to get too aggressive when it comes to building permits, because as I said earlier, and you may not have heard it, but when Councilor Houseman was asking, we've seen during a recession, the building permit revenue drop by 50% in a given year, year over year. And so you never want to be overly reliant on that revenue source. The reduction in FY '27 probably, I have to look at my notes here, but I believe it has to do with a reduction in that category to bring it back in line with a typical year. Last year, we had a record year for building permits. I will just anecdotally note, if you all follow the planning board's agendas, they are seeing somewhat of a decline in applications for new developments and things of that nature. So that will have an effect in this revenue source, just something to keep in mind. But I feel, you know, we're guarded enough that, you know, even if that did fall off a little bit, it wouldn't probably impact these projections too much. That's it.
Okay. It's a lot. I hope
lot.
everyone has that memorized. So I just have to follow back up, both Lorinda and I've thought of this before too. And I think it's probably not necessarily applicable to this budget because it's too much of a lift. But have we, with the trash fees, considered or looked at moving to a pay-as-you-throw? The numbers behind that, because I know that there are different households. It incentivizes the reduction of waste, which is, if you've paid attention to any of the waste reduction committee things, this is applicable to the problem of our landfills are 60% full. We're shipping them out of state, and by 2030, I think it is, or 2040, all of the landfills in Massachusetts will be full, meaning that we're going to be shipping all of our trash, which would be more expensive. So have we considered, instead of raising trash fees across the board for a standard 2-barrel amount, we could probably, if we looked to the future of this and looked into this system, we could kill 2 birds with 1 stone and work on reducing our trash fees as a city, and as well as then paying per consumer in a more fair fashion instead of a blanket increase.
So I don't pass judgment on whatever structure's in place, right? I'm looking at it strictly from numbers. And there's uncertainty with a change of program that gives me a little bit of pause. And the only reason is, there's fixed components to our costs to manage the trash, right? The collection route is a fixed cost every year. It doesn't matter how many barrels they pull. They're still doing the same routes every day. That's a significant portion of the overall trash cost. The tippage or the tonnage that we collect, that's where you get kind of a per unit cost. I don't know if there's enough trash reduction that would reduce those costs. So to build a budget in looking into the future, knowing that there's fixed costs and that there's variable costs, I'd have a tough time guessing at what the per unit cost for a pay-for-you-throw program is without a history of data. Now, other communities have done this, so we can rely on some of that data, but we need it in place and it need to be proven like in 2 months or 3 months, because we're building the budget. We're building the budget like now.
Right.
So, we need to make decisions really quickly.
Right,
if
and
that's
that's
the
why
route we're going.
I understand it's not for this budget cycle. But since we are talking about a long-term forecast, and since I have some counselors both in the room and here in the administration, I would like us to think of also not just the problems that and the deficit that we're facing for 2027, which is obviously the most pressing, but some of this can be broader discussions of moving towards solutions that may be better across the board, long-term. So maybe we're having a different conversation next financial forecasting meeting. So just kind of throwing that out there.
Can I just add on to that? I think that I'd like to understand how recycling fits into that picture, because we're not being charged for recycling, but we're not making any money off of recycling it any longer. Is that correct?
We are being charged for
Oh, we are
recycling,
currently being,
but it's a very good
but a
rate.
very small,
Yeah.
right. And if I'm not mistaken, the expectation on the next contract would be that since there's not the market for the recyclables that there was at one point in time, that would be more expensive. So when people are thinking about pay-as-you-throw, that would also include what you're putting out for recycling as well. It wouldn't just be your trash bag,
Right.
correct? Yeah.
It would have to be looked at and explored.
Sure, no,
Across the board for the contract, so, yeah. I understand. This is just
Sure.
coming off off the cuff here, so we haven't solved all the world's problems yet. Maybe next meeting, so. Oh, I think that's my only question on revenue. Mr. Silva?
In the past, there was discussion about putting together a committee to see if the city could negotiate a higher return on pilots. Has that happened? In terms of, approaching these institutions to see if we can obtain additional
That has
revenue.
been discussed many times over the years, and we still don't have, there is not a committee to date. I know there were several counselors looking into it at one point, but there has not been, to my knowledge, any further discussion or movement on that.
And as an example, for Endicott, if there are a number of visits by the fire department or the police department, are they charged at all? Is there a charge that they pay for those services?
No.
Is there a reason
Well, they pay a pilot.
they pay a pilot?
They do pay a pilot. Yep. It's about $167,000 a year.
Okay.
Yeah, if I may just add, in terms of materiality, even if we could get a good side, sorry about that. In terms of materiality, even if we could get a good bump in what they provide as a pilot payment, it would be a ripple on the pond of what we're trying to figure out, because the dollars wouldn't come close to really making much of an impact on the problem we're trying to solve, which is not to say it's not very worthwhile to do, because I don't think those numbers have been adjusted for quite a while. But in terms of solving this issue, probably not something that would get us very far. Am I correct, would you say, Mr. Analyst?
I mean, I think there's always value in exploring the options. Every little bit does help, but yeah, we've got a big problem, and you're right, that's not gonna be that material.
Mr. Copeland?
Yeah, I think piggybacking off of that as well, especially with our solar, and we've seen the price of energy increasing vastly. Like, is there potentially an opportunity to maybe renegotiate or look into that as far as how we might be able to benefit even more than what we currently are? Because I know we have a partnership in place. I think with everything that's happening, energy costs is probably going to continue to go up. And, financially, are we able to take advantage of those things?
So are you referring to the city's energy costs?
I think right now we have it where we have our solar in place, right? And we
Yeah.
have a company that's, instead of us working with, say, the electric company and directly getting money back for the solar that we're saving or selling that available solar to those companies, we have a third-party company working with us doing that in our place. And then I think they're giving us money back in return or giving us a cutback on the bill or something of that degree.
Yeah, there's a few parts to the solar puzzle that we manage here in the city. There's the actual utility costs. So for these lights and operations of all our facilities, we have a municipal rate for electricity, which we publicly bid regularly, and we just locked in a very favorable rate for our supply moving forward. That'll be our rate for, I'm looking to the mayor because he's got a really good memory. What was it, 21 months? No, the rate we just signed. Yeah, Dave would know. So anyway, we're locked into our electricity rate for the next, call it year and a half. In addition to that, I think what you're talking about is the power purchasing agreements that we have with a number of solar developers throughout the city. We've got basically 3 projects. We've got the one up at the airport, the one up at the landfill, and then we've got a third which encompasses all the other campuses. So you see them at the high school, you see them at the middle school, you see them on this roof, there are the carports. So there are a number of them that all are one project. We actually pay those developers to receive the credits that they generate from producing solar, and we use those to pay our electricity bills. And so there's a mechanism in there which allows us to effectively cut our cost down by anywhere from a third to probably about 10%, depending upon which agreement you're talking about.
Okay. And within that, so they're getting the credits for it. So for example, if the amount of credits that they're getting is increasing, do we have the capability to take advantage of that as well?
We can buy, we are obligated to buy all the credits that they generate in 2 of the 3 projects. The landfill, we take a portion of. Yeah.
Not all.
No.
So, and you mean by,
But you gotta think of it like in terms of like, I don't know, this is kind of an old term, but you guys remember Groupons, right? You'd pay like $80 for a $100 coupon. Like, that's basically what we're doing. We're buying these credits and then we're using the credit to pay our energy bill. So you can only utilize the credits up to the level you have energy costs. You don't want more credits than you have energy costs, because then you're buying these credits, but you're not able to utilize them. So you're actually it's costing more.
yeah, I think traditionally, say at your own home, if you had solar to such a degree where you didn't have to use electricity, now you have extra energy, you can then sell that back to the grid and then actually make a profit off of it.
Yeah.
Am I correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So the state statutes that kind of facilitate this development of solar have all pushed the deals in the direction of municipalities being a landlord, right? Because we're not a tax-paying entity, we can't take advantage of the tax credits. So, you know, we have a PPA, a power purchase agreement on private, a ground mount on private property out past the Birch Plains soccer fields, right? Soccer lacrosse sports fields. That's one. We have, as Mr. Ailes said, the ground mount at the old landfill between Brimble Ave and Essex Street in Centerville. And then we have the multi-site PPA. And each newer version of the state law has kind of tightened the screws on how much money the developers can make as well. So, you know, we negotiated, I think, 3 good power purchase agreements. But the program really kind of, it doesn't allow for cities and towns to actually build and own the arrays unless we're willing to pay all the upfront costs. Right? We haven't been in a position to do that. So what we get is we get a lease payment, a pilot payment on 2 of them, 1 of them?
I think 2.
2. Lease payment, pilot payment, and then we buy a certain amount of the credits through power purchase agreements. Does that make sense? I mean, it's been good for the community, it's been helpful, but we are not the owner of the arrays. The developer is, as I said, really pursuant to the way the laws have been written, kind of pushes all the deals in that direction.
Understood, thank you. Also, a couple other things. As the saying goes, I like to measure twice and cut once if we can. And I know we brought up some other things. As far as the interest loss, state funding cuts, federal funding cuts. Now, does that 3.7 million that we're talking about account for potentially some of those as well? Or is that in addition to the 3.7 million, if those things were to occur?
I'll go first, if you will. It does not account for federal funding reductions. This is the general fund. I saw Mayor Wu talk about this the other day. If the city of Boston, as an example, if they get the federal funding cuts that are draconian in nature, which may or may not happen, they could not make it up. And based on at least in my opinion anyways, based on my analysis of our financial position, if we get draconian federal aid cuts here, which it's not incorporated here, I don't see how the city could make that up. It would be very difficult in my view there. So no, it's not in here, but I wanted to weigh in on the federal aid reductions, which I know Emma will talk about at great length in a couple of weeks. I'm really worried about that stuff right now, personally. It's just, I lay awake at night thinking about this stuff, and I don't know why I do, but I do. So that's the issue. And then maybe, I don't know, Brian, anything else you want to add to that? Yeah.
And I think, just for me, one last thing, as far as something that we might just want to think about, is there an opportunity for us to potentially turn to the private sector for maybe some sort of help or partnership in dealing with some of these things? I don't know exactly what that would look like, but that might be part of a discussion we have.
That's a great question. That comes up from time to time in my own career. I said earlier, we need to have reoccurring revenues to match reoccurring expenditures to make sure we don't get into financial trouble, so that we don't jeopardize the bond rating. If we're going to get donations, like as you suggested, which is a great idea in itself, from the private sector, I would advise the city to use that funding for one-time expenditures, let's fix a roof or whatever. I really would suggest to you that's not a good solution for the operating budget that we're trying to address tonight here.
It could be a thing where, say, all right, we take, so some money's donated, maybe that goes into free cash, and money that would have went into free cash, maybe that goes back into some of the reincurred costs.
I don't think there's a pathway for that.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I like thinking outside the box, though, because no idea is a bad idea when
That's right.
we're looking at what we're looking at. And doesn't really, I don't think it makes anyone feel any better, but one of the items that Mr. Perry shared with our committee was a Mass Municipal Association report on basically how every city and town in Massachusetts is in the same boat right now, and having these kind of hard discussions. So we're not alone, but that doesn't solve the problem by commiserating. So are there any other questions?
Madam Chair, if I, just to piggyback, I'm glad this is on BevCam, but I would encourage anybody to go out and Google that MMA report. It's the Massachusetts Municipal Association. They're located in Boston. They do a lot of research and work with cities and towns in the Commonwealth. It's about a 12, 13-page report. Anybody on the committee, feel free to share it with anybody, but for the public out there, read it. It really is enlightening and can show you the challenges that Beverly, not only Beverly is happening with regards to Prop 2.5 and things of that nature, but everywhere in the Commonwealth. It's everywhere. It's not just this city. So hopefully maybe people will read that under the guise we keep hearing transparency.
Well, and I was going to say something to that effect. I will be sharing that on my Facebook page at least. But I was going to see if maybe the document that you presented in terms of the trends, is it possible to have this and maybe this article uploaded on the city website under the agendas as part of the meeting minutes? Is it possible? When the minutes get uploaded, can we just add it?
I don't know
Okay.
how to do that. So I'll
I
check
don't
with
know how to do it, but I feel like there has to be a way to be able to attach some of these documents and make them public if people would want to access them again.
To the
I know-
committee's area, right?
To the committees,
Yeah,
yes. We
right.
have on the, I have it open here. In the Agenda Center for the City of Beverly, every single department and committee is listed alphabetically, and underneath that department, you can drop down, open up, and there are documents and agendas, and that's where you can find a lot of the information. So if you're ever looking for something minutes after a meeting or an agenda in advance of any commission or meeting that's coming up, and it has all of the historical documents from the minutes and agendas in the previous years. So I will look into.
I will take care of it.
Okay, that would be great, because I think a lot of these things, at least I like going back, and I have the paper copy here, but I think the broader public could really benefit from taking a look at these on their own time.
There's extra copies.
Yeah. Yes. If anyone wants to pick one up for some light reading when they go home, so.
Fall asleep.
Okay. Any other final comments? All right. With that, I will say the next meeting will be on a Tuesday. The next two meetings will both be on Tuesdays, December 2nd and December 9th, both at 6 p.m., both here in council chambers, and both on BevCam as well. So I would encourage you to stay tuned, come to the other ones, watch this one again before you come. If you have any questions, please, again, if you want to send them my way, kfeldman@beverlyma.gov, and if I can't answer them, I'll try and get them to the people that can before the next meeting, and we can ask them publicly too then. And with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. I'm going to do another roll call vote so we can make sure everyone gets captured. So,
Yes. Aye.
Karen? Yeah? Jeff?
Yes.
All right. All right.
Yes.
Scott? Yes. Dominic?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
Emma?
Yes.
And Lorinda?
Yes.
All right, and I'm a yes as well, so that is motion passes 9-0. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.